What's the old adage? You don't make 100% of the shots you don't take. Just apply. Just do it.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
What is going on, all my aviation friends out there? Welcome back to another episode of Fly the Transition, where we will explore yet another fascinating story of aviation career transformation. I am really excited about this week's episode. I've been anticipating the release of this one since I did the interview, really. Even bumped it up a little bit in my initial anticipated schedule just to get this episode out there. So we're going to hear the story of Eric Fletcher, who is now a corporate pilot, but he didn't make that career transition until he was in his 50s. Before that, he spent many years in Hollywood working as a camera operator, and he worked on one of my all-time favorite shows, Dexter. He was on that show as the A camera operator for 7 or so years, and I got to be honest with you, the level of nerd out that I had during the course of this interview is pretty high, so brace yourself for that. So we'll be talking for a while about his career in Hollywood, how he made his transition into aviation later in life, and what he's doing now as a Part 135 pilot. This podcast also produced another one of my favorite moments in the way of the feedback that Eric actually gave me during our interview. Eric himself is a listener of the podcast, and it helps him out as he was going through his transitional process, and to hear his feedback and how much the podcast meant to him at the time was really special for me. So thank you so much, Eric, for that feedback. Thank you for being a listener, and thank you for being a part of this program as well. So as you sit back and listen to this episode and you think to yourself, I would love to ask Eric some questions about this transformation and what he's doing now and how I can go about my career transition as well. Well, you're in luck. Eric is a member of our Discord community. If you would like to reach out to him, you can join our Discord community. Just send me an email, flythetransition@gmail.com. I'll send you an invite and you can jump into the conversation in the community over there. Another exciting thing coming up this week is I will be featured on the Behind the Prop podcast. That episode will come out on Monday, January 22nd. So the day after this podcast releases, Behind the Prop featuring yours truly will release as well. So check those guys out. I talk about both podcasts and how I got into things and some of the lessons learned from both of these podcasts. I really appreciate the opportunity from the guys over at Behind the Prop, and I hope you'll take a listen to that episode. Well, it's time to dive into this week's interview with Mr. Eric Fletcher. One thing I'll note is that the interview is just a little bit longer than normal episodes, but there was so much great content I found it hard to cut in certain places. Don't get me wrong, Eric and I talked for hours, and after we stopped recording, we talked for even longer. So it certainly was a great time, and I think you'll really enjoy this interview. Well, Eric, welcome to the Fly the Transition podcast. I am so excited to have you on board with us tonight. You've got quite the story to tell, I think, and I'm really looking forward to hear it. So,
Well, thanks for the invite. I was really surprised when you reached out, and because it is a podcast that you listen to, and yeah, it's a story.
Well, I think we should jump right into it.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about your earlier life and your early exposure to aviation.
So I'm 58, which plays a part in the story later on. I'm 58, so obviously I was born in 65. I was born while we were still trying to go to the moon. There was a lot of moon madness. I was born and grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, which was McDonnell at that time. It wasn't yet McDonnell Douglas.
Okay.
And McDonnell built the Mercury and the Gemini spacecraft. And my grandfather happened to be one of the production managers on that project.
Oh, wow.
So he was responsible for sourcing material and getting it to McDonnell so they could actually build spacecraft. I grew up in an aviation-related family, except the three of us, my dad, my brother, and I, all went into visual arts. They're both still photographers, and I shoot movies for a living, or I used to.
Okay.
But I grew up around my grandfather working for McDonnell, my dad's brother designing PC boards, mainly for avionics, as a former Air Force guy. My mom's brother was an electrical engineer at Boeing at the time. His wife was a structures engineer at Cessna. So she's an engineer in the 60s and 70s, which, hearing some of her stories, I had mad respect for her and what she did.
Sure.
Because she was in a very male-oriented
I was
thing.
just going to say, yeah.
Yeah. My mother's sister was a flight attendant for TWA, and her ex-husband was a naval aviator who ended up being the lead flight instructor for Lufthansa's Phoenix operation. So I grew up around airplanes and, our family working in it. And, I wanted to drive race cars, play hockey, and shoot movies. So, but I still wanted to fly, because the thing was, as a small kid, the dream was to be an aeronautical engineer and a pilot. And then I realized that with my mild dyslexia, numbers don't work for me. So being an engineer was kind of not the best thing.
Yeah.
So it made that a little difficult, and I didn't like school. So, so that idea went away. Going through high school, I was a typical high school teenage boy. But as we were getting towards the end of high school, because of my father's association with political candidates, we had an access that, if I so desired, we would have been able to secure an appointment to the Air Force Academy for me.
Okay.
And I said, no, I wasn't interested. That was mistake number one. Because that means that would have changed my life hugely.
Oh, sure. You'd be on a completely different trajectory.
Exactly.
So in those earlier years, and even in high school, were you doing anything engaged in aviation, or was it just kind of the family background?
It was a family background. There was the desire to become a pilot. It never seemed to be the right time or the right place. And also, this is at the time in which you had to know Morse code.
Okay.
As someone with dyslexia, Morse is impossible.
Sure.
So that was actually an impediment to me following this dream of being a pilot. And when you initially think about it, it's like, oh, well, I'll be a pilot. It'll be great. And then you start, my aunt started feeding me, the engineer at Cessna, she started feeding me training materials. And all of a sudden I get to this chapter on needing to know Morse. And it was like, I'm sunk. There's no way for me to get around this. So that was a challenge at the time. The years went on as technology got better. The need to know Morse went away.
Let's talk briefly about your dad. So your dad, I think, too, is kind of part of how you ended up within film, correct?
Yes, very much so.
What was his career path at that point? You mentioned some political stuff, and
so my dad is an immensely talented still photographer, to the point that my brother and I are very accomplished, and we still look at his stuff, and he'll go out and shoot a picture, and we'll both look at it and go, okay, we don't understand how he did that, but he did, and we were standing right there.
Yeah.
So he's immensely talented, and he was working with a group that did a lot of political commercials and documentaries. Before the internet and everything, a politician would come to your town with a 16 millimeter projector and a film and show a movie about what his plan was. And that's the way they did their campaigning. So my dad worked with a group of people that included a gentleman by the name of Charlie Guggenheim, who won an Academy Award for several documentaries. They shot all these political campaigns, and they were a very successful group of people shooting political campaigns. And so my dad ended up being Hubert Humphrey's personal photographer during his run for presidency.
Oh, wow.
Being personal photographer on Bobby Kennedy's run for presidency, did some stuff with Ted. He was just there throughout all of the 60s and 70s politics when that was done. And that created a bunch of interesting relationships. I grew up with politicians in the house. I grew up, and then also my dad, because of his skill, I grew up with, presidents of companies that built equipment for the still industry and the motion picture industry at dinner at our house growing up as a child. So it was a very easy transition for me to go into the visual arts. Now I went into motion picture because I thought a little differently than my dad and my brother.
Okay.
My brother's a very talented photographer, and he works for an equipment manufacturer. You start thinking about things a little differently. Now, the cool thing is about the motion picture industry is it prepares you for aviation, because it prepares you for a crewed environment. Because when I'm shooting a television series, I'm having to interface with at least 12 people, all talking at once, all having ideas at once. And so it taught me to be able to compartmentalize and work things out. So, but yeah, growing up around my father, it was very interesting. Basically it definitely taught me to forge your own path. It taught me to think a little differently and think outside the box. And it taught me to be fearless about making mistakes professionally and then creating results. It was a great outlet. And growing up with my dad and his talents and skills and learning to see the way he saw it made a huge difference in what I did. Now, what's interesting is being a still photographer, it didn't help me in the motion picture industry because he didn't know anybody in the motion picture industry. So everything I did in the motion picture industry, I had to go out and fight for myself. Although he did make the single biggest life-changing introduction in my life, which was introducing me to an individual named Ted Churchill, invented the Steadicam operator. And my father and Ted Churchill were friends. And Ted invited me and my father and my brother up to Chicago, where he was shooting some commercials, so I could see what the Steadicam was about. And he strapped this contraption on me at age 14, and I ran up and down the halls of the Holiday Inn Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, flying his Steadicam. And I remember him leaning over to my dad going, he kind of understands this pretty well, and he'd be a pretty good operator. And that's kind of what led to what I did for, 35 plus years, 37 years.
So for those that aren't familiar with the Steadicam, can you describe it a little bit?
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. It mimics the human arm. You put on a vest, and on that vest there's a socket block, and so that allows all the forces to be put under your body. You put this spring tensioned arm into the socket block, and that arm has a shoulder, an elbow, and a wrist on it.
Okay.
And so by using spring force, it can lift a load. And then that connects to a 3-axis gimbal on a post that on the bottom of the post has batteries and a monitor, and on the top of the post has a camera. And with that, I can walk or run, and that arm will take out all the vibrations. And so the shot is very smooth. It looks like a dolly shot, but I can go places a dolly can't. I can make shapes that a dolly can't. And so luckily, the Steadicam was invented in 76. It started becoming popular in the early 80s. Well, I was out of school in the mid 80s, so it was a perfect timing. So I started learning it, and I had an aptitude for it. It was mechanical. I could understand it. Framing was everything that my father had taught me. And so I was able to bring those together. I played hockey, so I was fairly athletic, and I could wear this thing for intolerably long amounts of time. And, this is not a lightweight device. This thing could go up to 90 pounds, 95 pounds on your body. And that, over a very long career, ended up causing some problems. But in doing so, it opened up a huge amount of doors, multiple Emmys, moving from the Midwest, St. Louis, where there's no film work, to being the A-camera operator and running shows in Hollywood, and shows that are fairly significant. The show that I'm best known for is Dexter, which is in the Smithsonian, is culturally significant. And that was a show I spent 7 years on and had just an immense amount of freedom on.
Yeah.
And then while I was doing that simultaneously, I was doing True Blood when I was on hiatus. So I had the number one show on HBO and the number one show on Showtime at the same time.
And candidly, for me, like I loved Dexter. So fantastic work, my friend.
Thank you so much. It was fun, and the interesting thing was it was the one. Everybody in this in the film industry talks about that one show you hope to get, that one most perfect event. And I had it, and I had it for 7 years. I didn't do season one. I did everything all the way up to the end, including the top secret unit that apparently ticked off a lot of viewers because, he was a truck driver in the north. Everybody says he's a lumberjack. He's not. He's a truck driver.
Just a truck driver.
Yeah, just a truck driver. But yeah, and that industry opened up a lot of doors, and it was a lot of fun.
So I pulled up a photograph of this thing. Well, frankly, you wearing this thing, that looks super uncomfortable.
Wearing it correctly is it's actually not uncomfortable. It's just heavy and tiring.
Okay.
But with a quarter turn of a screw on the socket block, it's the greatest Marquis de Sade device ever invented. It will cause a lot of pain. The problem is it causes a lot of wear and tear on your body. And, the bigger problem is there's two types of station operators, the guys who have fallen and the guys who are going to fall. Mm-hmm. And falls hurt. And falls cause some issues.
Yeah, I bet. When you first started doing Steadicam work, what were you mostly doing? Local stuff? I mean, obviously, you're not going to jump in and start with Dexter, obviously, or a show like that.
Yeah,
but.
I was doing a lot of local stuff. You try to convince the local producers to let you use this, very sophisticated, very heavy, very expensive piece of gear. And I hooked up with the local CBS affiliate. There's immensely talented individuals that I worked with a ton over at that station. A gentleman by the name of Al Frank, who ran the special projects department, and then my partner in crime, another cameraman by the name of Gary Womack, who, first day he and I met, we were slinging shit at each other like you wouldn't believe, like we'd known each other for years, and we had just met. But I shot a lot of their promotions, and then also all their special projects, and because of it, I ended up having my name put on a bunch of Emmy plaques and Emmy statuettes because of Al's genius. We did some pretty interesting shows. We actually did a show called When the Cheering Stops, which if you type that into Google, you'll find out that there is a Bob Costas show that was on HBO called When the Cheering Stops. Yep. Well, Bob stole the ideas directly from Al. The whole concept of the show was Al found 4 St. Louis sports heroes that had very different lives after they exited the sport.
Okay.
We talked to a hockey player, Ed Kia, who suffered a traumatic brain injury. It was a sad story. He was actually on waivers from the Blues, being picked up by the Islanders. He decided to play one last game with the farm club and crashed into the boards, brain injury, and not picked up by the Islanders. And luckily, Ralston Purina, who owned the Blues at the time, decided to honor the no longer current insurance policy. But so it was very interesting, and that's a very satisfying show to do. And we did a bunch of Steadicam on that. We did all sorts of really out there things. Al did one where he had the St. Louis Symphony broken up, playing in different galleries at the St. Louis Art Museum playing pictures at an exhibition. And I basically walked past paintings and everything and celloists playing and all that. And, it was a lot of fun. And it was a great way to learn and to build your chops and to make mistakes.
Yeah.
So that you could go and move to that next bigger job. So I started in St. Louis, and then the circle went out 150 miles, and then it went out 300 miles, and then it went out 600 miles, because I was one of 4 Steadicam operators in the Midwest.
Okay.
So, I would go down to Nashville and I'd do movies of the week and things like that when they were still shot in the United States. And, again, great learning environments, because it was decent directors of photography. And if you made a mistake, well, you were just a local guy. So,
sure.
The pressure was off. I was the operator on a NBC 2-part 4-hour movie of the week with Leah Thompson, the actor from Darwin and Greg, the tall guy who then went on to Criminal Minds. And because of that relationship, and again, it works just like aviation. It's the personal relationships you make in the film industry and the recommendations. Because of that relationship, the assistant cameraman who was on that show went and started the show in Salt Lake, where he was the Steadicam operator, and then he got an offer to go do another show that he needed to get covered. So he called me up and said, hey, come on out to Salt Lake, do this television series called Cover Me. And so I went out to Salt Lake. I did Cover Me. The director of photography, his daughter was getting married in Australia, so he took 2 weeks off. They brought in another director of photography who he and I got along fantastically. And 9 months later, he's doing season 3 of a television show called Angel, about a vampire.
Yeah.
Starting my long association with shooting vampire shows. I've only done 6 of them.
Jeez.
And
my wife has likely watched a lot of your work then.
He calls me in like May of 2001 and says, hey, I'm shooting season 3 of Angel. Would you come out and be the A-camera Steadicam operator on it? And, he's reaching out to a guy who lives in the Midwest when he's got this giant talent pool in LA.
Sure.
And I move out to LA, which, if you take a look at the time frame, I moved out to LA in July of 2001. 3 months later, the world changed.
Yes, it sure did. Yeah.
I was dating my wife, and I said, hey, look, do you want to go out to LA? She said, well, you promised me you'd never move to LA. I said, well, promises were made to be broken. You want to go on this adventure? And she said yes. And we've been out here for almost 24 years now.
So I want to go back to something you said here. You mentioned that, 9/11 changed the world, obviously, for all of us. What was the impact within your industry?
It ended up being really scary the first few months, because the FBI came to all the studio heads and said there's credible threats against the studios.
Okay.
Well, think about it. It's how we're sending out our propaganda to the world. It's through Hollywood. On that Tuesday morning, my phone starts going nuts at about 6 a.m. LA time. I wake up and I plot out to the living room and I turn on the TV. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the towers. And pretty much as soon as I turned on the TV, the second plane hit. And and I'm fielding these phone calls. Are you okay? Is anything happening out there? Initially I'm asleep. I'm groggy. I'm like,
right.
Yeah, I'm okay. What's going on? So we had a 10 a.m. call that morning, and the production office calls and says, hey, look, it's going to be an 11 o'clock call. We're going to push it back. And then they push it back again, and they push it back again, and they push it back again. And finally, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's like, we're going to shut down for 2 days. And at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we're shutting down for the week. Go be with family. I'm in LA.
Mm-hmm.
All my family is in St. Louis.
Right.
The airspace is closed, because at this point we've closed the airspace, which makes LA eerily quiet, because now nobody's going out. It's like a 1950s nuclear disaster horror movie. All I could hear was every 40 minutes you'd hear a fast mover flying up and down the coast.
Right.
you'd hear a jet engine, you'd hear the sound of freedom flying up and down the coast. So the whole industry shuts down for the rest of the week. We come back, we shoot on locations for 4 days. We're going back into the studio on Friday. And it was on Thursday night that the producer stands in front of the entire crew and goes, there's credible threats against the studios. Security's going to be tight. Plan accordingly. And it was 6 months easily before everybody in this town started feeling comfortable and stuff got back to normal a bit. It did change the way that the motion picture industry works. No longer was it easy to walk onto a lot and say hi to your friends. Now it was tons of security, very airport-like, very TSA-like. If you weren't on a list, you didn't get in. If you didn't have a badge, you didn't get in. It changed a lot of people's opinions and thoughts. I mean, I remember I did Grey's Anatomy, and one of the actors in Grey's Anatomy was in Third Watch, Kim Raver.
Yeah.
And Kim talks about sitting in her apartment watching the towers get hit and then watching the towers fall. And then the call out, the electric department of Third Watch grabbed the trucks, grabbed the generators, drove to the pile and set up all the movie lights. So all the initial movie lights on the pile, that was Third Watch.
Wow.
It was personal.
Yeah.
And John Wells was amazing. He called the caterer and said, I don't care how much it costs. I don't care what you have to do. Open up the catering trucks at the pile and feed everyone until there's no one left to be fed. And John kept catering going for 3 weeks at the pile.
That's incredible.
You know, so there was a lot of outpouring. It was whatever we could do because we do have interesting equipment and specialized skills.
Yeah.
And apparently the gaffer is a chief lighting technician. He called the lead Teamster driver and said, what's the chances of getting my truck down there so they can put up the lights? And the Teamster captain was like, we're already dragging generators down there. Yes, we'll move your truck down there.
Yeah.
And the gaffer called his lighting crew and said, we're setting up lights in the pile. And every person on the crew came down there to help. So, it's the good side of the industry. It's the side of the industry that's not talked about enough.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't have known any of that. But I mean,
yeah,
I do know that obviously Third Watch being based in New York City, that I knew that there was a little bit of, interaction back and forth, but to hear that story is really something.
Well, and Kim and I have a connection in the fact that I had a friend killed in the tower. She was at American Express Travel Related Services, which was the impact of Plane 1.
Okay.
And she was on the phone with her mom, and her mom said the phone just went dead. It just went, and that was it. And so she can only figure that Laura had her back to the window and didn't see anything. So, so it was personal to me too. And it was interesting because that forged a really great working relationship that Kim Raver and I had on Grey's.
Photography, cinematography, it's visual arts, right?
Yes.
And I think that it's really easy for people to think that that's just, you're just holding a camera and you're just pointing where someone tells you to point it. But is there more art to it than that?
Oh, much more. And that's the funny thing. It's like people love to say, oh, you're just a camera holder. Well, no, not really. Case in point, Dexter. It's a great example of how multiple skills all come together. So my position on a set is I'm the camera operator. So I am responsible for the physical panning and tilting of the camera, but then it starts to really branch out. So I work very closely with my focus puller. I don't actually focus the camera. I literally only pan and tilt.
Okay.
And I might also zoom, but I pan and I tilt. In the old days, there was a focus puller that sat right next to you. They're not looking through the camera, and they're judging distance of where the actor is, and they're setting that distance on the lens. And they're also interjecting an art when you're on longer lenses and you're doing focus pulls. You're going from one character to the other, or you're doing a tag and you're panning through a scene and they're picking out the focus of where we want the audience to look. So it's my job and the focus puller's job to make you look where we want you to look. Let's add another level of complication to that, in which I have a dolly grip. And the dolly grip is pushing the dolly in and out, and he's also booming the camera up and down. Okay, so this is all a discussion that happens before every take. The focus puller, the dolly grip, and myself starts to discuss what the objective is in the scene. Three of us all watch the rehearsal. The director of photography is there also, generally working with the director to figure out what they want to shoot. My camera triangle, my camera team, the other camera team, and on some shows you have a third camera. We're all sitting there watching. All of us are discussing amongst each other, okay, what our potential areas of coverage are. Then the director and the DP come over. We all have this huddle. And now in this huddle, on top of that is the gaffer, the chief lighting technician, and the key grip, the boss of all the grips. The grips are responsible for camera movement, set safety, and shadows. I've always joked that the operators are on the second ring of hell, because the first ring of hell is the director and the DP, and the second ring of hell is the gaffer, key grip, the operators. Then there's the third ring of hell and the fourth ring of hell. And everybody has this conversation. So before anything's done, there's this very large conversation of what the objective is, what the mission is, what the mission plan is. Once that happens, the A operator starts to work with the rest of the other camera operators, and I start working with dolly grips and everything. We start figuring out camera placement, where we're going to put dolly track, where we're going to, if it's going to be Steadicam, if it's going to be handheld, if it's going to be a crane. Yeah, so there's this whole level of stuff that's going on. So it's very complex. It's a lot of time consuming, but we have to do a lot of it every day. On a show, you're measured by how many setups you do.
Okay.
So you might do 3 or 4 scenes, but each scene might have 5 or 6 setups within the scene. And a setup is a direction that you're pointing the camera. So in a day, a good day on television is 45 setups. And we try to keep our days to 11 hours. So if you do the math, you're doing stuff every 10 minutes. I'm trying to keep placing 8 conversations. So it's like talking to ATC, coordinating with the captain, whatever else you have to do. So it's a fantastic training ground of how to allocate time and how to move things.
Yeah.
So it's not just standing there and pointing at camera.
That's certainly not. Yeah, you mentioned earlier talking about, crew resource management and working as a team and a crew, but it sounds like that's really crucial with what you were doing on set.
If you don't do it, you will not make your day. And as the A operator, if you can't do it, you won't make Friday.
Yeah.
You'll be fired. The camera operator position in Hollywood has 2 interesting caveats. It's the most fired position, and it's the position with the most fatalities. Camera operators are killed more often than stunt guys, because we're in the middle of it. We're trying to get the great shot, and we don't see everything, and the stuff happens. So, and also, like, if the show's not working and the director's having problems, the easiest, fastest way for the director to take some pressure off him, it's his fault. Fire him.
Yeah.
And then you get fired. So it teaches you to think under a time constraint. It teaches you to solve problems. I've always maintained that I'm not a camera operator. I'm a professional problem solver. That's what I do for a living. The operating and the art comes secondary to solving those problems. And that really does give you a good foundation for what you're going to do later in aviation.
Before we continue with Eric's story, a quick word from those who make the Fly the Transition podcast possible. Let's talk about some of the best active noise reduction headsets on the market. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just taking flight lessons, Lightspeed Aviation headsets are engineered with you in mind every step of the way. They've created the quietest and most durable A&R headsets on the market. Their high quality and innovative technology ensures you stay comfortable, connected, and safe in the cockpit. I've personally flown with Lightspeed for over a decade, and I wouldn't dream of flying with any other headset. Elevate your flying experience with Lightspeed. Check out our affiliate link in the show notes so that you can support the podcast with your next purchase. Aviation friends, are you looking for eyewear that's as adventurous as you are? Look no further than Flying Eyes Optics. Their ultralight, comfortable, and durable glasses and sunglasses are perfect for pilots. They are designed by pilots, for pilots, And for my money, they're the best aviation eyewear that I have ever had. If you or that special pilot in your life are interested in Flying Eyes, check out our affiliate link down in the show notes and use code FlyingMidwest10 and you can get 10% off your next purchase at Flying Eyes. Aviation enthusiasts, have you heard about my friends over at Pilot Quarters? This pilot-owned family business is crafting your next favorite flying shirt. Their chart-inspired merchandise comes in camp shirts, polo shirts, and more. And by popular demand, they're adding lightweight fleece hoodies and long-sleeve tees to their collection. So head on over to pilotquarters.com today and soar in style.
You're listening to Fly the Transition. If you've ever thought about changing careers and getting into the aviation industry, welcome to your new home. Now, back to your host, Jim Schilling.
You mentioned a little bit about the amount of creative freedom that you were given once you got on the Dexter. Talk a little bit about that. Like, what does that mean for you?
Oh my God, that's the drug, man. That's what you want. You're given a lot of freedom as an operator. On Dexter, I was given the freedom to the point that incoming directors were told by our producers, if they had never worked on the show, we work this way and this happens. And they always added the caveat, we've got this camera operator. His name's Eric. He will go off the reservation. All of a sudden, what you guys talked about on the shot, he'll see something develop and he's going to go somewhere else with it. Just let it happen. Your episode will be better for it. That's unheard of in the industry because there's so much big ego.
Yeah. Well, that's quite the vote of confidence for you too, from the producers.
It's a huge vote of confidence. And it comes from, I try to foster a really great relationship with the actors. I try to foster a really great relationship with everybody. But the biggest thing is with an actor is if I can gain their trust, they're more willing to do something that I ask them to do.
Sure.
And by gaining their trust, it's protecting them. I remember we had a new actress come in one day and she was asking Julie Benz, who I had worked with on Angel and who I'm now working with on Dexter, and Julie and I love each other and get along very, very well. And, so Julie's going, okay, this is such and such and such and such. She gets to me and she goes, and that's Eric. Eric is awesome. Eric will protect you. And that's the biggest thing. When you got an actor that says, Eric will protect you, that means I can ask Julie to do anything and she's going to do it.
Yeah.
Because the big thing is, and people don't realize this, and there are times, like especially on Dexter, I'm a foot away from Michael. I've got a camera in his face. I'm, holding the matte box. My face is 6 inches behind the matte box. I'm holding the matte box and I'm shoving into a Dexter close-up, which is right here on a wide-angle lens, which is what we were known for. And to do that, I'm a foot away from him. I'm 6 inches away from him. And he has to trust me so that he has to be comfortable so he can do what he did in that show, that's what made him and that character so iconic.
Yeah.
A lot of it was his fearlessness of the camera, but his trust with me. So I get hired on the show in season 2, and the director of photography likes to shoot the kill rooms because they're all handheld. And so I was in there with him doing handheld on the kill rooms, and we shot him 2 cameras. The first kill room we do in season 3, and I'm building my reputation in the show, and people are getting comfortable, and actors are loving it. And Michael and I are really getting along. And Michael and I all of a sudden realize we're like on the same wavelength, that we both understand the character of Dexter pretty much like nobody else on the set.
Sure.
He walked up to me one day and goes, dude, you and I are like on the same wavelength when it comes to what we're doing. He's like, I'm watching you and you're just absolutely anticipating what I'm going to do. This is awesome. And it freed things up. It allowed him to do more things and be more spontaneous. And luckily I had a great focus puller that could also roll with the punches.
Yeah.
But in season 3, we're getting ready to do the first kill room of the season. It's in the second episode. It's Finding Freebo. It's the Freebo kill room. The network is totally against doing this kill because Freebo is not on a table. The network had sent down the edict, all kills happen on a table. Victim is always horizontal. networks are a pain in the ass. They just send out these weird memos. They think they just do it to do it. And we're all like, no. And we had a pretty fearless director, and he's like, no, we're tying the guy to a ladder. It's in a garage. It's a makeshift kill room. It's messy. You know, she didn't have time to set up a normal kill room. And so I said, okay, I know how to satisfy the network. So I set up the shot, and I roll the camera 90 degrees. And now Freebo looks like he's laying down, and I'm so tight on him, you can't see the background. You can't see the fact that the garage is not level. You see a shape move into the frame, and as that happens, I start walking backwards, and I level out the camera, and you realize that Freebo is stuck to a ladder. And there's Michael. And the director looks at me and goes, oh my God, that's perfect. We're doing that shot. So we go and we do the scene, and I start at 90 to do that, and Michael realizes he's got all this room in the room, and he goes to one corner of the room, and for some reason I felt like, you know what, I'm going to build space. And I go to the other corner of the room, and now it's this huge wide shot, and Michael runs up to Freebo, and I run up to Freebo, and I get them both into this really tight close-up, and then you see the knife flash, and as the knife flash, I pull back a little bit, you see the knife plunge. That's it. I've shot the whole scene in one take. And the director comes in, Marcos comes in, and he's like scratching his head. And he goes, if the camera broke, we've got the whole scene. We can move on. And we shot a couple pieces of coverage, and as soon as they call wrap, Michael goes running off the set. And about 20 minutes later, there's all the producers, there's a lead writer, they motion the director of photography over, and I'm watching this conversation going on. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, Eric. And I'm like, I'm fired. I screwed something up. I'm getting fired. I walk over, and I'm informed by the unit production manager, Gary Flaw. He goes, at Michael's request, you're the only person doing kill rooms from now on.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, Romeo. The director of photography just got thrown out of the kill room. He's like, this is the way we want to do it. Just keep doing that. And Romeo pulls me aside and says, you just put your stamp on the show.
Wow.
And it was from that point forward, I was given just freedom like you wouldn't believe. And it got to the point that in season 4, Michael walked up to me and said, do we need to rehearse kills? I said, no. Season 5, he walks up to me and goes, do we need the director in the kill room? I said, no. And so at that point, from season 5 forward, any kill room, it would just, Michael would look at me, and he'd go, more, less. And I go, more. Or I go, less. And that was it. And I was directing kill rooms at that point. And that was just the way the show went down.
That's
and
awesome.
It was just, yeah, here's responsibility. You're doing what we want. We're going to continue to ask you to do that. And we're going to continue to foster that. And that's what you really want, to keep really creative employees employed.
Yeah.
You know, in season 7, there's this great shot. My favorite director, John Dahl, and it's a scene. You said you watched the show.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's a scene in which Deb is in Dexter's inner office.
Okay.
And she's going nuts, going, I've seen you kill Travis. I'm the goddamn lead detective of homicide. I should turn you in, but I can't because I love you. What do I do? And she's crying. And if you remember the scene, she starts talking, and all of a sudden the camera drifts down, and she is wringing her hands to the point that her hands are turning white. She's squeezing so hard while doing the scene.
Mm-hmm.
I operate with my left eye open. I saw what she was doing with her hands. I just start tilting down. My focus puller Joel's on the knob, and he looks, sees the hands, rolls right to the hands. Take is over. John Dahl comes running in, goes, oh my God, Eric, that was brilliant. Moving on. First and only take. We didn't shoot any coverage of it.
Wow.
And, editors come down like 3 days later. They're like, how did you know to do that? I said, my left eye was open. I saw her ring in her hands. I just made a choice. But it was like that type of stuff was, they wanted that and they rewarded it.
Sure.
And it made the show better. We'd seen Deb cry. I didn't need to see her cry. I know what she looks like crying. This is more interesting. Let's go there.
Yeah. So you have in your notes here that in 2008 you turned down an opportunity to enter the aviation industry. I think I might have an
number two.
but I think I might have an idea why. And it sounds like you did okay for yourself.
Yeah. The problem why was the yearly salary was what I was making in 3 weeks on Dexter.
Yeah. I see what happened here. So,
Yeah. My wife had given me this experience opportunity. I don't know if you're familiar with ATOP, Wayne Phillips, Airline Transport Orientation Program. First off, he's awesome. He basically, and it's like super cheap. It's like 2 days of ground school and 2 or 4 hours in a full motion sim. Half of the time you're pilot flying, half the time you're pilot monitoring.
okay.
In 737 sim. And it was done down in Houston at Continental's training facility. I had just gotten my multi-engine rating, and this was between season 2 and season 3 of Dexter. It was like, man, this is pretty awesome. And dude was a great teacher. And we're coming out of the sims. I'm walking a little behind the group, and all of a sudden this hand goes on my shoulder. And it's Wayne. And he kind of pulls me back and says, "You did pretty good there in the sim. If you'd like, I'll walk you in to the chief pilot tomorrow morning or this morning when they open at 9 a.m. and they'll give you a job today. Do you want to do it?" And I turned it down. So it was like, oh, kind of hurt.
Yeah.
But, like I said, really quickly doing the mental math, it's like, okay, it's paying $18,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what the pay was in 08.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't afford that.
Right.
And it's like, and we're getting ready to go back, and I'm in this place on this show that is like, even just doing one season of it, you kind of realize this is it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a great group of people, and I'm like, I can't do it. So I turned it down. So that was number 2. And so that's why I said, when number 3 came along, it was like, I'm not turning.
Yeah, you got to jump.
I got to jump.
You stayed involved in aviation, it sounds like, at least in some part during your time in film.
Yeah. Film allowed me the nice convenience of being able to fly a DA-42 for a lot of hours. I have an absolute saint of a wife who understood that multi-time was more important than single time, and that sure, it's more expensive, but in the end, it's going to pay off.
Sure.
And so she encouraged me to, by the time everything came about, I had 650 hours of multi-time when the event happened in June. And I truly believe it was the fact that half of my was multi-time.
Sure.
And I truly believe that made me more interesting.
So I want to talk a bit about you moving towards a transitional point. It sounds like part of it was injuries from all this time kind of putting your body through hell running that equipment.
Yeah. 20 and 21 were interesting years because of COVID.
Yeah.
And, I was very fortunate that going into 20, I had a job lined up. I was going into Grey's Anatomy, and again, because of my problem solving abilities, there had been some edicts thrown down because of COVID of how we had to change the way we shot television. It was limiting the amount of people on set. And Grey's Anatomy was a show that was 3 cameras. 3 cameras means that's 9 people minimum. Focus, floor, camera, bird, dolly, grip. So it's 9 in camera. Well, at least 1 in sound, booming the shot, generally 2. So now we're at 11. And then however many actors are in the scene. And there were rules that there could only be 6 people on set with actors.
The math doesn't work, Eric.
No, it doesn't. So I pitched an idea to production of, hey, look, there's this new piece of gear, brand new. And if we pull the trigger, we will actually have serial number 001 on set. And it was a we make use of a telescopic crane that we call a techno crane.
Okay.
And it's really cool because now the arm can telescope, so it adds an additional axis that you can move.
Gotcha.
And being telescoping means I can fit it into a small area and leave it compacted. And then when somebody moves, I can reach out and do the shot. So I convinced the powers that be to spend an amazing amount of money to rent this techno crane that comes with 2 additional crew members that don't have to be on set. And we did something that nobody had done before, which was we shot an entire season of television on a 17-foot techno crane, and people thought it could not be done with 2 additional cameras in the scene. And we put 1 camera in the long lens, so they were out of the ring of COVID. That the COVID team would come in with their pool noodles and start hitting people with their pool noodles, which always cracked me up because the COVID people would always stand shoulder to shoulder with their pool noodles. And I looked at one day and I went, "Can I borrow your pool noodle?" I said, "Yeah." Take the pool noodle. I went, and I hit both of them with the pool noodle. And they went, "Oh, you have a point."
Yeah.
And I had their pool noodles. So I pitched this idea, and there was a selfish reason I pitched the idea. At that point, my back was destroyed.
Yeah.
I could no longer stand for more than 10 minutes at a time. And if I could operate crane all day, I could sit in a chair.
Okay.
Which means I could do my job.
Yeah.
And much like we have in aviation, I didn't tell anybody I was having problems. I did not tell a single person because then you might not get hired. So I did it as a career preservation maneuver. And we got through the season of doing the show, and the back was deteriorating. I mean, just walking to my parked car was a problem. I'm 6'1". At this point, I had shrunk down to 5'11", because 2 discs were gone. So when this show ended, I went and did 2 other things, and in November of 21, I couldn't do it anymore. So I went on a hunt for a doctor to fix me. The problem is I have other issues in my back, and I was very, very concerned about pushing the pain higher and requiring additional repairs. And I use the analogy of potholes on a bridge, and I was like, well, let's fix the structural issue first.
Sure.
And we'll worry about everything else later. I understand it. I found an amazing surgeon with just an amazing medical team who put, as I refer to it now, my Iron Man starter kit, implanted 2 3D printed titanium discs, 9 screws, and a fixing rod, where L4, L5, and L5S1 used to be. The interesting thing is in the recovery, the stretch back to 6'1" was the most painful because all my nerves and everything compacted.
Oh, sure.
And it was the stretch that hurt the most.
Yeah.
And it took me, that was in May of 22. Surgery was May 16th, 2022. And I was out on disability for a year. And going into February, the final appointment, you're okay, we're happy where everything is. I sitting there talking with my doctor, and I got a grant. I said, so can I do Steadicam again? And his answer was freaking awesome. He was like, of course you can do Steadicam again. But before you leave the office, you need to schedule your next surgery. Yeah, it was over. And I was angry. I was hurt. It was not a good day. It was not a good month. My wife will tell you the end of March was not a pleasant time. I was angry at myself. I was angry at the industry. I was sitting there thinking back on if I would have taken that job in 2008, I'd probably still have the original parts. And so at this point now I needed to take inventory of what I could do.
Sure.
And this is the point in which gets to why I'm here. I could do what I've always thought would be the fun retirement career, which is aviation. So I put my head down and now it was go time. So, it was fly a bunch, get current, make sure the skills were there. Reached out to some friends. I, put in probably 100 job applications, and it's difficult because I have zero aviation business experience.
Sure.
And people aren't seeing the fact that as an operator, I have pretty good crew resource management skills already. It's not something that I have to be taught. Here, I was able to leverage what I'd done in the motion picture industry and go, okay, it's all very similar. And finally, talking to a friend one night, he's like, well, how many earners do you have? I'm like, 1250. Radio silence for a couple of days. And a couple of days later, he goes, all right, you're going to be getting a phone call from the assistant chief pilot. Now's your time to shine. And chief pilot calls me, I think it was May 4th or May 2nd, something like that, of this year, roughly a year after the surgery, and says, and every conversation was like, okay, so we need to do this, and then we need to do this, and we need to do this. And I'm like, wait a minute, this sounds like I've already got a job. And May 9th, I went and did a drug test, which I laughed my way through the drug test, and they thought I was insane because I'm sitting here going, I've been in the motion picture industry my entire life where there's a ton of drug use. I don't use drugs, never have. I'm getting a drug test the day before my 58th birthday. This is hilarious. Did that. And then I think it was May 27th, I had a sim eval, which is a fun story because, I went and did some smart things, I think. I went and I sat with an instructor in a simulator.
Okay.
And just shot some approaches. I was like, change stuff up. Don't tell me what I got to shoot. Put me in the soup. Let me figure it out. Let's see if I can do this.
Yeah.
So went, rented a sim, found a great sim instructor who was on her way to flying for an airline. And she was having a blast because she's like, oh, this is a situation in which I can learn also, and it was really cool. And we did 3 of those. So I think I did 6 hours in the sim. I talked to my buddy who has a couple of Gulfstreams. When I got the email, it was like, plan on a G4. Here's the profile. So we went, sat in the Gulfstream, ran through the flows. So I was at least familiar with the cockpit.
Yeah.
I get there on the day of the sim and they go, we're doing it in a CJ3. I prepped for the Gulfstream. This is not cool.
Yeah.
They also changed it by a day. And I really think it was, let's see how he does with change. Let's see if he can adapt. And I had 1 hour or 2 hours in a Citation Mustang in the real world. And I get in the CJ3 and I've got no idea what to expect. It's a V1 cut, climb up. I'm like, man, there's a lot of power in this thing. It's climbing just fine. And I do the whole profile. And the assistant chief pilot turns to me and goes, you did really well. I said, what's next? He goes, offer letters. I'm like, wait, what? So Memorial Day weekend was rough because I'm sitting here going, where's the offer letter? Where's the offer letter? Finally got the offer letter on May 31st. Signed it before I even told my wife I had the offer letter. Because I'm like, this is I'm not going strike 3. Yeah. I'm not going strike 3 on this one. And then June 1 was a blur. It was a flurry of email. I had to do a whole bunch of computer-based ground school before the 4th of June.
Oh, it's a good thing they gave me a lot of time to do it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. A lot of prep work, and I'm like, if I can prep stuff, I can nail it. Mm-hmm. And, but my entire life has been, you don't really know the schedule. You can show up on set and something's not working out. They're going to change the order of the shooting that day. So you got to be flexible. So I had to be flexible. So June 3rd, I'm on an airplane down to Orlando, Florida to FSI for a Citation Excel initial. And the 4th is first day of class. I walk in, there's all the placards, all the materials laid out. And I'm like, holy, wow, this is real. I'm starting this. It's interesting. I'm 58 years old. I haven't studied in a long time and I forgot how to do it.
I was just going to ask you that too about the challenges with that.
I melted down a few times. There was phone calls out to a support network, and I got to say, one of the best things that I did in this whole matter, and everybody should be doing, is, I reached out to a group of mentors. I was an absolute sponge, and I would ask questions and go, what do I need to expect? What do I need to do? How do I do this? How do I study for it? I had 5 or 6 friends that were just absolutely invaluable in prepping me, all people who have been through this, who have multiple type ratings and things like this. And that, I think, was a secret sauce.
What was your program like when you actually got there?
Everybody there is partnered with somebody except me. Yeah, I'm the only person from my company, and there were a bunch of Fly Exclusive guys there. And Fly Exclusive uses their own checklist. Place I Fly uses the factory checklist. Anybody who's had a type rating understands that you have to go by the company checklist in the sim. So the guy I ended up being paired with, he was a 33,000 hour Airbus pilot who had retired from American and was going to go fly for Fly Exclusive. And, ton of type ratings. He'd been flying since he was 23 years, flying for airlines since he was 23 years old, and it was like, all right, Rocky, you're my guy.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, I'm doing, and luckily Rocky and I got along really, really well. So it was just knuckle down time. I didn't have an expectation of what type school was going to be like. I had an expectation that it was going to be a fire hose and it was going to be tough. And that's all I knew about it. It was both, but I knew that there was a written at the end of ground school. I hadn't asked the right questions to my mentors of, what is that written? How does that work? I didn't realize that it was, as long as you can correct back to 100%, you're going to pass it. So I had this massive amount of self-pressure on me because, as I said earlier, I am extraordinarily competitive, to the point that I am competitive with myself, which is a dangerous place to be when you're doing something that you've never done before, that is a massive change from what you're used to doing. I'm used to being one of the better camera operators in LA. I don't have to rehearse. I'll make it up and they'll love it. 2, going to a rigid school where you have to have the correct answer. You have to follow the correct path, procedure, phraseologies. And that took a lot of learning. By the time it was all said and done, Rocky and I were the only 2 in our class that had 100% uncorrected. So you're walking out of ground school on Saturday afternoon going, damn, now I got 36 hours that I could just be relaxed, and then get thrown into the sim and then go into panic mode again.
Yeah, right. Can you talk a bit more about the sim and the check ride portion of your training?
The sim was interesting. The sim is fun. If you're going for your first type, I will tell you one piece of advice is the sim is nothing like the real airplane. It does not fly like the real airplane at all. And I didn't find that out until, 8 days after I got my type. The sim is very interesting. I was like, so Rocky, you're going to be left seat first every time, just so I can see what I've got to do and learn from it. I had some challenges. I'm not going to lie. I had a difficult time with the V1 cut. That's also because of the way the sim flies.
Okay.
And I didn't know that. And so I cratered on that because I got very, very down on myself because I was not performing to a level that I felt that I could actually perform to. And then there was the really big monkey wrench, which was Rocky's company didn't want the designated examiner that we were assigned. So we got split.
Oh.
And I got a seat filler. And I was like, oh, crap. This is not good. All of a sudden, echoing in my head is Tom Hanks in Apollo 13. This is flight director bullshit. We know the tones of each other's voice.
Right.
And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm dead. My crutch is not there. Much to flight safety's credit, they got me a seat support guy that was amazing. Went in, a little scared about the check ride. Went in, did the ride, made a big mistake on my last landing, but gave a decent positive argument about why I should be allowed to pass. I landed. I pulled the TR paddles. I don't think the nose gear was on the ground when I pulled the TR paddles, and I wasn't expecting the reversal. I didn't expect the buckets to come out so fast, and it kind of did a wheelie, and came out of the TRs and put the nose back down. And because you're landing in Memphis, it's a 10,000-foot runway. You don't need the TRs. He's like, I could feel you. I said, yes, you could, but let's look at it from a training point. I made a mistake in the sim that I now will never, ever make in the aircraft because I know what happens. And he looked at me and went, all right, you made a good argument. We'll chalk it up to training. Congratulations, you have your type rating.
Awesome.
And that was an amazing moment. It was like, wow, this plan is coming together.
Mm-hmm. So what is it like once you're finally done with training and you arrive with your company?
28th of June, I airline up to the airplane. The other pilot's already there. They've been left there by a contractor crew. I meet up with the pilot that I'm flying with. He's like, all right, so, how much experience do you have on the XL? I said, just got my type. I've never even seen the airplane up close. I had never walked around the airplane before. So we walked around, did a pre-flight that night. We did the full walk around that night. The next morning, came out, and it was a repositioning leg. We're at Truckee Tahoe. And he goes, you're flying the airplane, taxi out. I'm like, what? He's like, taxi out. And so, I flew it back down to home base, and it was just like, oh my God. First off, I was like shocked because he's actually trusting me to fly the airplane.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, I can actually do this.
Let me ask you a couple questions about your current role then. So you're in a 135 operation. What kind of flying are you guys doing within your company?
We're doing 91 135s.
Okay.
So we do owner flights. Those are the days we get to wear polo shirts, and we don't have to wear the costume. Like tomorrow, we're doing a 135 leg and then our 91 repositioning leg. I fly as the SOC. Here's the other thing that's amazing is, I was hired at 1250, so I got to get those 250 to get my ATPs.
Sure. Yeah.
I can, fly as PIC on charters. 91, I can fly PIC, but it's the 135 that I can't fly PIC yet. Great group of people that I'm working with. They're very hands-off. They just want the pilots to do their thing. So the way I approach the role, first off, there's a lot of learning. The type school does not teach you everything you need to know. It teaches you what you need in order to get the license, to get the ability to operate the aircraft. I basically treat it as I'm going to do as much as I can with the captain that I'm with until they tell me to slow down. I do most of the mundane stuff. The captain I fly with, he does not like making hotel reservations. So I did not understand the giant travel agent aspect of this job of getting the hotels, getting the rental cars, the adage of airplanes don't fly until the paperwork outweighs them is kind of what you have. Now, it may sound like I'm complaining. I'm not. It's easy. October, I did 4 legs the entire month of October. To give you an idea of what I'm used to on a motion picture set, typical work week is between 68 and 78 hours.
A week.
Wow. Of physically taxing, mentally taxing. You're working 14 hours a day. You come home, you eat poorly, you fall in bed, you barely see your significant other, and then you're at the mercy of a strike. I definitely do the pre-flights. I deal with the FBO and getting the fuel and, whatever services, all that stuff, just so that I'm getting into that. I'm learning it, and, it's repetition. It's doing it. You're doing everything that you're going to do as a PIC, as an SIC. And then I try to do it efficiently, quickly, with a smile, because honestly, none of this is difficult compared to what I used to do. And then, I get to fly legs and stuff like that, we alternate legs, and, in the cockpit, you're doing what you would do as a pilot monitoring. I'm dealing with radios. I'm dealing with avionics. I'm, when we're told to shortcut, generally the one punching the keys on the FMS, and you're backing up your captain, double checking each other, and it's fun. It's engaging.
That is fantastic. And it sounds like you've really found your place. I mean, granted, sounds like you had quite the accomplished career in film, but now to be able to now transition into a new role where you find engagement and joy that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I am incredibly fortunate. Yeah, there's an aspect of you make your own luck, but I mean, to have people go out on the line and go, you need a job? You're the right person for the job. I'm going to tell my company to hire you.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge thing when a friend will do that for you, because now everything I do reflects on him.
Right.
And, the other thing is you need to honor that. He said, there is one stipulation on this. I said, anything. And he goes, pay it forward. And I said, you got it. And right now I have a friend of mine who is a rigging grip who has a destroyed back. And I am helping him to get out of the motion picture industry and fly for a living. I introduced him to a friend of mine, and he's been flying some air ambulance stuff, flying his SIC, flying air ambulance.
Wow.
And he's just like, I don't want to get out of this seat, Eric. I'm like, don't, time to move on, and the next person asks me for help, I'm going to help them. I'm going to pay it forward, because I've been very blessed and very fortunate that somebody believed in me enough to say, I'm going to stand up for you, and, that's a difficult thing in my book to repay.
It's incredible. It sounds like you're trying, though, by mentoring others.
I am. And, and I don't have all the answers, but I got some of them.
Yeah.
There was something on one of the mentorship groups, guys like, look, I'm 56, wondering about the airlines, what are my chances? And somebody said, have you applied? And he's like, no. And my response was, what's the old adage? You don't make 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yep.
Just apply, just do it. And the guy's going to do it now, and sometimes it's just, that's the push that people need.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more than happy to provide that push. It's incredibly gratifying to help somebody, and especially to help somebody enthusiastically find their dream, find their happy place.
So how are things going with your company now? Like, how have you progressed? How are things going?
Right now, it's almost 6 months later. I have 150 hours in the type already.
Nice.
And I'm sitting here going, why didn't I do this earlier in my life? I'd probably still have original parts.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple of people who have asked me about it. I end everything with, if you want to do it, just figure it out. Just go do it. It's achievable. And I'm proof. I'm 58 years old. I'm hired by a great 135 company. I'm flying an airplane, and I had zero professional aviation experience. I had put in the time and the work, so it wasn't anything given to me. I had 1,250 hours. I had 650 of those are multi-time,
Mm-hmm.
So I had prepared myself, but it's definite proof that if you want something, you can do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So as we get ready to wrap up here, what advice would you have for others who are considering a career change in aviation? I think I know your answer, but...
Oh, the answer's simple. Just do it. Look, if you're married, you have a significant other, you need to sit down and talk to them. And you need to have the hard, honest discussion of what the sacrifices are going to be for the first year or two. Face it, first year pay anywhere is going to be lower. It's not horrible, but the benefits, I think, way outweigh the negatives. And honestly, I can't really think of many negatives. I think you just have to sit down and you have to have that conversation. And I think most partners are going to be like, yeah, if this is what you want to do and you're going to be happy, let's do it. You do need to apply yourself. You need to prepare. Right now, the industry is wide open. There's a place for pretty much anyone, but you have to be realistic. You're not going to go in as a captain.
Yeah.
You're going to, transition. You're going to go in as an FO. Like you said, I've had a lot of success in the motion picture industry. I use that as fuel for when I've got to do something maybe I don't want to do. Luckily for me, I'm on an airplane that has an externally serviced toilet, so I don't have to deal with that. But there's a ton of opportunity out there. And the really cool thing about this industry is 99% of the people you're going to encounter want to help. They would love to see you succeed. Because if it's something you really want to do, just be happy. It's pretty awesome.
Awesome. Well, I cannot begin to thank you enough for your time. This has been fantastic talking with you. You've been really entertaining to listen to, and just the stories that you've got. And I could probably sit here for hours. But this whole process of making these is really enlightening. So, and I appreciate that you listened. So,
well, and I do have to. Okay, all right. This is going to sound like brown nosing because we've already done the interview, so now I can say this stuff.
You can say whatever you want now.
But I've listened to every single one of your episodes, and not all of them were major resonance with me, major hits with me, but the ones that were, oh my God, they were rocket fuel for me. You had a couple that were just absolute rocket fuel that I was listening to going, that's me. I can do that. I can make this happen. That person was able to make it happen. I can make this happen. It was very helpful. Your podcast was very helpful to me. Yeah, I really appreciate this. And like I said, I really appreciate your podcast. Your podcast was rocket fuel because it came along at the right time for me. And I listened to it as I was in the final approach stage of making this transition. And it was absolute rocket fuel. It just reinforced that I'm moving on the right path and I'm doing the right things. And, so I appreciate it. I appreciate you wanting to talk to me.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to the episode.
An enormous thank you goes out to Eric Fletcher for coming on the Fly the Transition podcast and sharing his story and all the entertaining stories he had about his time in not just aviation, but in the film industry. And I got to say, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that comments like Eric made at the end of the episode is rocket fuel for me too. Helps me know that I'm on the right track with this podcast and sharing these stories, providing inspiration for others. That is one of the things I love about the aviation community. Just the open sharing of stories and experiences and mentoring that occurs is just fantastic. And I'm glad that we can be a part of that through this podcast. And hey, speaking of mentoring, on our next episode, I welcome aviation interview coach, podcast host, and all-around awesome dude, Nick Fialka. He is the host of the Ready for Pushback podcast that focuses on people's preparation for moving into a career in aviation. He brings a little bit of a different flavor to the podcast series where I wanted to take an approach of not just telling stories about people who've made the transition, but also some of the resources that are out there that can help people through that process as well. And a surprise for me along the way is he has his own transition story mixed in there as well. So all that coming up next week. And as always, if you're enjoying the podcast, if it's resonating with you, if you think it would benefit others, please share that with others and like and subscribe to the show on wherever you're listening. Also, if you could be so kind as to leave a rating and review, that information helps feed the podcasting algorithms and, well, feed me too, to help me keep going and motivated to share these stories with all of you. Thank you so much for taking some time to tune into this episode of the Fly the Transition podcast, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.